Okay, so welcome everyone. This is our third GLODEM webinar series event. My name is Güneş Ertan and I'm an assistant professor of international relations at Koç University. I will be moderating today's session. Today we are very happy to host Burcu Meltem Arık from Education Reform Initiative, which is probably one of the most important organizations in Turkey in terms of producing education policy-based research. So before I leave the floor to Burcu, I want to introduce her very quickly. Burcu Meltem Arık worked on education policies, environmental, nature education, sustainability education, climate change education, ecological literacy, and biomimicry for over 20 years in civil society. Since 2017, she has been implementing data-based K-12 education policy monitoring studies at Sabancı University Education Reform Initiative as the ERG Education Observatory Coordinator. Previously, she worked with the Turkish Association for the Protection of Nature, Nature Association, United Nations Environment Program, Tema Foundation, and Çekül Foundation. She taught ecological literacy, sustainability, and biomimicry at Istanbul Bilgi University between 2015 and 2020. She is a member of the IUCN Commission on Education and Communication and Commonwealth Research Collective. She is also board member of the Network of Education Policy Centers and the Buğday Association for supporting ecological living. So I'm going to leave the floor to Burcu, and we want to thank her again for making time for this event, because we were just talking and she told how busy they are at ERG. I also want to give a quick overview of the structure of the webinar. Burcu is going to talk about, provide an overview of education policies in Turkey, about 30 minutes, and then we will move to the Q&A session. You can use this to write your questions, and I will read them, and then we'll see how it goes from there. Okay, thank you, Burcu, again for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a very valuable opportunity for us to be here and to be able to discuss with you current trends and the needs and the gaps and best practices, hopefully. So you introduce myself. I will actually directly share my screen with you. It will take a while, I'm sorry. I guess you can see. Right, great. So education system is as you can imagine, it's a very complex ecosystem. So I will, unfortunately, within the limited time, I will only be able to share several indicators, key indicators that we see, but you can find a much more detailed evaluation of the last year from our websites. They can all be found at our website or through our other social media accounts. Thus, I would like to discuss with you what happened and where are we now in terms of K-12 education in Turkey. But let me first remind you who is ERG, and then I will actually, with several indicators, I will be able to discuss with you status of access to education, educational environments, content of education, teacher policies, educational outputs, governance and financing of education with you. As the Education Reform Initiative, we are very pleased to have had the opportunity to shed light on developments in our education system. And we do it annually We share annually our evaluations with the public for the last 14 years. And since we are founded, actually, ERG has advocated for the rights of all children to receive a quality education. And we use this framework, rights-based framework, to discuss educational policies on many levels, from classroom to municipal level. And we argue that we argue for the need to make improvements to education policies that will increase quality of education. And by quality, we don't mean only academic achievements, I would say, but particularly policies related to educational rights for all children. So that's where we stand. We are an independent, not for profit think and do think. That's what we call ourselves, because not only we work on education policies, policy monitoring, policy recommendation, but we also quite often we also try to do research and development to implement innovative and critical programs that could be modeled and that could be scaled up, at least that could be shared widely. But we aim to contribute to systemic transformation with 3 pillars, I would say. First one is actually discussing sound evidence, policy making, policy evaluation based on sound evidence and data, which is very actually, it's getting harder, unfortunately, in Turkey. Constructive dialogue, that's very important, but this is also getting harder, a bit harder, because, considering the polarized society, it's sometimes not easy to discuss critical issues on education. And critical thinking, innovative thinking, I would say. These are the main three main pillars for our contribution. We not only focus on policy processes, but also policy outcomes, which you will see at some indicators. And as I mentioned earlier, we are child-centered and rights-based organization. We have 2 teams, 2 main teams, which I'm the coordinator, is the Education Observatory. Our team do research, monitoring, promotion of evidence-based policymaking and advocacy. And Education Laboratory works on dissemination, finding and dissemination of good practices, content, model development, and network, obviously. So my presentation will present recent policy evaluations on governance and funding, students and access to education, teachers, content, educational environments, and outcomes. But then again, I will actually also would like to share one of the key frameworks that we have, which is inclusive education. What we mean by that is actually really we try to contribute to the transformation of education system in Turkey by understanding that this is a process that needs to address and respond to the diversity of needs of all learners. And our evaluations based to reduce exclusion from education and from within education. And actually, here is another thing that I would like to underline, which we find it very critical and it should be discussed more often, is that trying to integrate learners, some learners that are vulnerable into mainstream education will not work. Thus, for us, inclusive education means actually it's an approach that looks into how to transform education systems and other learning environments. As you know, right now we are doing a webinar. We have new learning environments like home and internet in order to respond to the diversity of learners. The right to education has 4 pillars. It should be available, accessible, acceptable, and adaptable. Turkey, over the last few decades, actually achieved availability, accessibility to a level, and it's not it's a really good level, we can say, up to a point within a framework, but we are not yet there for 100%. And accessibility and adaptability we have, as we will be able to discuss hopefully within a few minutes. There are issues there on discrimination, on achieving, addressing specific needs, addressing challenging inequalities, culturally appropriate systems, and quality and safe schools. So I will start to discuss with you a few very basic indicators which are critical, and it's important to monitor these over a long term. This is the net enrollment rates and number of students in pre-primary education, which is a very critical education throughout the compulsory education. It's not compulsory yet. It will be the 5 years, age of 5 will be compulsory, hopefully. But in recent years, as you can see from the graphic, there has been a significant increase in students enrollment rates between the ages of 3 to 5. And it is really critical because whether students receive a pre-primary education or not impacts quite a lot in the coming stages, and throughout the life, actually. In the last academic year across the country, the net enrollment rate for 3 to 5 years old is around 41%. And for age 5, it is around 71%. But we should always think this in mind. Not all education is free, actually. But, in terms of right to education, it should be free for all. But it's not. So it depends. The socioeconomic conditions, the regions, the gender really impacts who is enrolled in pre-primary education, who can have access to pre-primary education. As I mentioned, these rates vary according to gender and region. There is a good development recently. Ministry of Education aims to ensure enrollment in preschool education at the age of 5, and it aims to make it 100% by 2023. However, we had COVID conditions, so we don't know what happened, unfortunately. Over the last years, unfortunately, we don't have much information on the enrollment rates throughout COVID, but hopefully we will have over the coming months. Another critical indicator that we monitor for pre-primary enrollment, access to education, is the distribution of students to institutions. The highest percentage is, luckily, to actually official kindergartens affiliated with primary schools, as you can see in this graph as blue. Almost 50% of the schools who are enrolled in pre-primary, they are enrolled in official kindergartens. Here, we would like to research more, and we would like to focus and underline the community-based institutions. There is a tendency to increase in the percentage because it's a critical age, actually. What we mean by community-based institutions, and it's I should also mention that it's a public policy to diversify the institutions. The ministries and the government aims, actually, the Turkish state aims to increase the enrollment and to increase the access, but we don't know the quality, particularly the quality of tutors in these institutions. These are institutions that are under presidency of religious affairs, Diyanet İşleri Başkanlığı, or municipalities, or foundations and associations. So there is a need for further understanding and research on who is tutoring there, who are participating, and what kind of curriculum are implementing in this field. But there is a tendency that it is increasing over the years. Please let me know if I am slow or right on time, etc. Let me know, Güneş. Here is the graph, which is another key indicator for us, and we don't know the impact of COVID, unfortunately. And we foresee a huge impact on COVID for this graphic. These are the students in and out of education. Age, you can see the age bar. Blues are in education. Although compulsory education in Turkey is 12 years, enrollment, unfortunately, and since 2012, it is for 12 years, enrollment didn't hit 100% yet. Even the as you can see from age 6 and 7, the enrollments are increased over the years, but still not 100%. And it's critical to understand who are not in the school. And one more underlining that I would like to mention is that being in the school doesn't mean that there is a quality education going on or the kids are learning. So that's another issue we will be discussing soon. There has been a long-standing effort and many policies to ensure the participation of primary schools children in education. And as you can see in the graphic, there is an effective result. The gender ratio is also really in a, the gap has decreased quite importantly. Here you can see two important levels, which is pre-primary and then the secondary education, high schools. The net enrollment rate at the secondary education level increased actually to 85%, but not yet, even it is compulsory, not yet 100. There is distance learning open schools, but even including distance learning open schools, we are not yet there. And there is a big difference between the regions and in considering the gender. Here, I share you the upper secondary education net enrollment rates by region and gender. As you can see, there is a huge difference between regions. And some regions, there is difference between genders, between boys and girls. The Southeast Anatolia and Northeast Anatolia, you can see the lowest net enrollment rates. And highest is Eastern Black Sea and West Anatolia. Which means that we cannot, we are not yet there. We didn't achieve pre-primary enrollment yet to the expected levels. And we are actually, the schools, the boys and girls dropping out of school at secondary education level. And there are differences on the reasons behind for boys and girls. This is the graphic which is critical for us as well, because it's also it's a very speculative area that is discussed with in particularly social media. Percentage of 14, 17 age students in distance educational institutions to students in formal upper secondary schools, as you can see. There was a peak around 2016, and this was a public policy. The number, there was an aim to increase open schools percentages. But over the last 2 or 3 years, actually, the aim is to decrease this percentage. And if I can give you a perspective on gender, around 56% are boys and around 43% are girls that are enrolled in this institutions. But again, I would like to underline another thing here. It is critical to research and understand the quality of these institutions. And there's few research on this area. And even, when we have field work with students who are enrolled in these institutions, even they don't see themselves as being in the school system, because most of them are working. As I mentioned, I hope I mentioned. If I if I didn't, I will now. But schooling alone will not tell much about who is in, who is out, and what the systemic problems. That is why one critical indicator is that we look is percentage of non-attending students above 20 days. But again, please note that this is before COVID data. COVID data, unfortunately, we don't have much information. But as far as we know, the Ministry of Education implemented a nationwide research, and they have the exact data, and they are in order to, work on the gaps. But this was before COVID, and even that there is a decrease in absenteeism rates at all levels except primary school. And there is a need to identify and we don't know the reasons that push students out of school. So measures should be provided to ensure that education can continue effectively. Most of the studies, particularly within the ministry, they look to the reasons outside the school, but it should be both, the reasons in the school and around the environment, school environment, should be carefully and detailed researched. But here you can see from 2017 to 2018, the vocational schools was problematic. But over the last years, the public policy, they prioritized these schools, and it seems that at least before COVID, they achieved up to a point. Effects of COVID, we have in our latest reports, you can see much more detailed information, but you also are in it. But the effects of COVID was severe, and it was unequal. There was an existing 2-year educational gap between children from lowest and highest socioeconomic backgrounds, and according to a study of the Ministry of National Education supported by World Bank, there is this, they consider that there may be an increase by 9%. And access to internet, although there were many interventions, many supports, but it is still low among children with lower socioeconomic status. And the figure is even lower for those households with 3 or more children. So school is now home, and we don't have detailed information about the home environments. There is this, we focus on gender and female students as ERG, and since female students are expected to spend more time in housework in large households, we know that studies reflected that we can argue female students are more disadvantaged than male students in this area. But not only female students, girls. There are quite a number of children in need of special measures for access to education, like special needs, temporary protection status, who have child labor is a big problem. Children of families working as seasonal educational workers, Roma children, village schools, children from village schools, and minority schools. You can find data on these vulnerable groups in our reports on our website. But if I can share a few of them, I would like to share the special needs. Sorry that these are Turkish, but I can't, I will try to actually reflect. Compared with the previous years, total number of students enrolled, special needs, we don't have the ratio because we don't have the data. There is an increase, and the increase is at all levels, but the decline in the rate of increase was noteworthy for us. And again, I would like to mention that we don't have the COVID impact on this data. Decrease in the number of students accessing the secondary education level is alarming. As you can see, lower secondary school is 179.877, but then when you come to the upper secondary school, the number of students who are enrolled are 81,000 around. And if you can go over the graphic, you can see that girls have much less access than boys. There were MEB interventions during COVID, like IM Special Education Mobile Application, EBA TV. There were material supports, there were family supports. But according to organizations such as Disabled Child Rights Network, ECHA, although there were really important interventions, the lack of accessible content was still a problem. Failure to provide appropriate content was a problem. Learning losses were much more severe, and there were groups within who need special education who shouldn't be online actually. So anxiety and aggression increased among these students, and there were higher strain on families. When we look to the net enrollment rates of children under temporary protection status, you can see that over the last 3 years, it's around the same, a bit over 60. There was an increase comparing to the last year, but the challenges are there. Lack of teachers with mother tongue, discriminatory attitudes and behaviors in school, around school, poverty, child labor. TÜİK announced the data on child labor, but they didn't include Syrian kids, Syrian families. So there is a huge impact there. And the distance learning that, when we have the research, we understood that EBA content, the content that was put in by the Ministry of Education, they were mostly in Turkish. Within this first month, there were also Arabic or, special needs education languages, though it wasn't enough for these groups. There was a lack of parental digital competence, insufficient internet connection, insufficient of devices, etc. And the enrollment rate among temporary protection status children, we can say that there is a problem, again, like nationwide, in the pre-primary and secondary education part. Levels, sorry. When we look to the children at village schools, gender level, you can see the total, then girls and then boys. And you can see the pre-primary, primary school, lower secondary, and upper secondary. There is a low number of institutions, particularly for lower and upper secondary. And there was a need for supporting families, empowering teachers, mobilizing local stakeholders for this village school. But you can find more information on our data. When we look to the educational environments, it's a critical area that we focus actually. You can see here in the strategic plans, performance programs, Ministry of National Education already mentions the problematic areas there, the weak points like the security, health, hygiene conditions. And it was before COVID, and during COVID, the impact was much more. Yeah, but there is actually one critical thing, one critical aim that was shared with the Ministry of Education was that it is important for them to ensure safe educational environments. Double shift education is another indicator that we focus. It's a long-term problem for Turkish education system to overcome the inequalities. The class rate with more than 30 students in primary school is 22%, and in secondary schools is 30%. There is an aim to decrease these, but still we are not yet there. And the budgetary issues that because of the COVID, most of the budget that was aligned for reducing the double shift education in Turkey is now moved towards internet or device support or other supports. Under the educational environment, we also look to other areas such as trust-based relationship between teachers, students, school management. And we monitor nationwide or international evaluations. Here you can see PISA and TALIS. And we also look to the 11th development plan. In schools where trust-based relationships between teachers, students, and school management are dominant and participatory decision-making methods are adopted, then we see that the rates are lower than those where the prevailing management style is oppressive and hierarchical. So it is really important for students, to feel part of the ecosystem at school. The COVID pandemic has pushed the discussion on the special construction of classes. We have double shift problems, but we need this special reconstruction of the classes, of the schools, of the education in general. And there is obviously a need for flexible school design, but that means that these are all in relation to financing, prioritization, and other problems. With the transition to distance learning, home became, as I mentioned earlier, educational environment, and it became a really critical discussion point for Turkey. Physical separation from schools has caused several problems. Now I move to content of education. Losing social learning within schools. Unfortunately, the discussions in Turkey mostly on either, on vocation or academic success. But schools are not only where you learn, where you have academic successes. Losing social learning within schools was a problem. Deprived of peer learning based on communication among students in class environment was a problem. So the curriculum was at the forefront actually during COVID, not the well-being of teachers or students or parents. Of course they were, but the curriculum was much more at the forefront. However, the primary function of educational institutions should be to contribute to individual and social normalization. Here we are on our third term with online. It will be more effective to develop the basic needs of knowledge, express say, and confidence, and switch to education with short and practical activities according to the needs. EBA was an important part of this distance learning, online learning. We understood it much more, but there needs to be a clarification on the content. It improved, considering that we are in the third term, but much more should be done because there is around, according to the official data, there is more than 5 million students who couldn't effectively use EBA. And the digital literacy became really important for teachers, students, but not only those, but also parents, unfortunately. At the primary education level, the percentage of free and elective courses was less than the lower secondary level, but we don't know the impact of those. But recently, I guess today, Minister announced how it's going to be, what will be the future aims, but I couldn't check it now. I will probably after our discussion. So let me move a bit further. Teachers were at the forefront, as you know, and as you saw. They need actually, the inclusiveness for teachers was problem on many levels. Digital literacy of teachers, techno-pedagogical content knowledge need, which I mean actually combining pedagogical content knowledge, technological content knowledge, and technological pedagogical knowledge was needed. But the teachers mentioned that they weren't ready. they try to reach out to students. Probably you have the same problems. There were 40 students enrolled in the classes, but only 5 of them could achieve to access in some regions particularly. So the stress and exhaustion was another big problem for teachers. Occupational satisfaction was a problem for teachers. There were good best practices on solidarity among teachers, but need for autonomy and need for collective working still there. When we look to the educational outputs for Turkey,
Burcu, maybe if you could try to finish like in 10 minutes.
Okay, in 5 minutes, let me do because I think I used quite a lot of time. Okay.
Thank you.
So these are the several evaluations that are either used nationwide or international, but we have issues in maths, in understanding, in science. There are regional differences, there are gender differences. So it's critical to look at this area as well. Here there is a comparison. The difference between the two regions that you can see for PISA is around 2 years, and for teams, it's almost 2 years, I would say. So this was before COVID, and the impact of COVID will severe this actually. So we are right now discussing learning poverty, learning losses, and let me finish here. Maybe we can discuss with questions the education governance. Thank you, and sorry if I took longer than I expected. Let me stop share.
Okay, I think we are doing fine with time. So let's open up the floor for questions. You can also raise your hand, and we can, especially if you have a long question, I can allow you to talk. Shorter questions can go to the Q&A box, however you like. Okay, I saw a hand, but then it disappeared. Batuhan, no. Yes, Haiba, let me allow you to talk. Yes.
Actually, it's me, Iman. My question was, is like the platform of online education, does they increase the inequalities, or we can consider that they give more access for people to have access to some limited resources?
This question depends on who the children we are talking about. For some children, for vulnerable groups, it definitely, unfortunately, deepened the inequalities. Like, special needs education, children who are living in rural areas, girls, Roma kids, obviously. So for vulnerable groups, the gap deepened. We don't know the impact yet, who actually took, who took the advantage and how, to what level. We don't know the data there yet. But overall, when we look to the current inequalities in Turkey, they are deepened.
Okay, so Alia has a question. Alia, do you want to ask it yourself? I just allowed you to talk.
Sure. I was just curious about, sorry, I'm eating a snack. I was curious about, you said something about polarization in the beginning and how it might be an issue for organizations like yours to create policy for governments and the government officials. And I was just curious about if you've seen, if there's been a steady increase in less willingness to talk to one another, or if it's more one-sided. I was just curious about how polarization has affected research around education policy. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Well, over the last couple of years, with the latest, with Ziya Selçuk, I would say, the doors was much more open for collaboration within the ministry. So my actually insights on polarization was mainly for the public part, or the, in the politics part, I would say. Within the Ministry of Education, there were many areas and discussions and collective works to overcome the problems, the gaps, existing gaps, and the ones new ones that are, here now because of COVID. But when you open a discussion on several issues, such as the open schools, for example, in public or in civil society, in the civil arena, there is a polarization there, understandably, with the religious schools, İmam Hatip okulları, or some other areas as well, like the financing areas as well. So I meant that actually, but the relationship between the public institutions and the civil society is ups and downs always.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, I had a related question about your access to data. Are you working with data that the Ministry of Education makes publicly available? Or like you said, you have more access, so do you get access to raw data as well? Or you just get access to these percentages and aggregated data?
Over the last few years, we achieved to access more data. Publicly shared, or shared with us on several occasions, but then became public through us, I would say. But before that, there was starting from 2012 up to 2016, I would say, we couldn't get any data at all from the ministries. But the data is there. The data, we should question the data as well. From TÜİK or from ministry or from any public institution.
So the data quality is the issue.
Data quality is a question. It was always there. It is still there. It was improved, obviously, over the years, but we are far from what should be, the ideal, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, so Burcu has a question. Burcu, do you want to ask it yourself? I allowed you to talk, so you can ask it yourself.
Sure, thank you. I didn't want to interrupt the previous question. Firstly, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering more about the educational nonprofit organizations in Turkey. Do you think that nonprofit efforts overall are either dispersed or they're mostly focused on giving scholarships to those in need, and therefore their influence stay limited in the policymaking arena, perhaps?
There are quite a number of rights-based nonprofit organizations such as ERG, but there is, of course, organizations that you mentioned, and they are higher in number, I would say. But according to the theme topic, for example, there is a huge collective effort among educational nonprofits who are working particularly on Syrian kids, Afghan kids, refugee kids. And there are discussions there. There is rights-based institutions there, refugee-led institutions, organizations there. So it really depends on the team, actually, but both. But the efforts for education policy impacting public policies is a challenging itself, and was much more challenging during COVID.
Yeah, thank you. I was also wondering, as a follow-up question, perhaps the increasing number of private schools, do they make it seem like education issue is a less important issue, or limit the engagement of parents, perhaps because they just go with the other option?
privatization is another area I didn't mention today, but we look deeply there because it's a problem and it deepens the inequalities, and it's a public policy to increase the private institutions, educational institutions. But we are for public schools, free schools. That's actually for like how many years? I can't remember, but over decades, I would say it's a public policy to increase the percentage of private schools. And actually the financing of families, households, I would say. There is a tendency that there's an increase that reflects the inequalities actually. The families, the households who do not trust the education system in Turkey, they are trying to find their own means for their children. But the thing is that working for your own children will not help your own children. So working for all is the essence and is the policy area that we all should focus.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Alia, you can go ahead and ask your question.
I have another question. I'm actually curious about parents and if you had any data about what maybe different classes of parents, what they want from the education system, or if you guys have done any surveys about that.
We did a survey before COVID, and it was nationwide. It was, it was by Ali Çarkoğlu. We worked with Ali Hoca, and Güneş Hoca was involved in several discussions as well. But we couldn't publish because of COVID. Right now, we are actually working on the data. One of the reasons that we actually did that research was to understand what actually was the need, because that was another speculative area that was discussed in public. Several, parents or families want one type of institution for their kids, etc. We wanted to understand that, but I'm not allowed to reveal the data now. Very shortly, hopefully, we will have the report soon published, and you can find it on our data. But it was before COVID. I should mention that as well.
Thank you.
We look forward for that report. Let's see. Batuhan has a question. Batuhan, you can ask your question. I allowed you to talk.
How big is the discrimination problem in education in Turkey? Religion discrimination, gender discrimination.
Maybe we should clarify discrimination, like I don't know, teachers having some biases or more systemic discrimination.
Both could be a good answer if you ask me. Starting with the system, if there are any cases about the teachers, I would like to listen about that either.
So that's a very deep. There is of course discrimination, and it's everywhere within the system at all levels, within each feedback system, I would say. But let me share you one recent research information on Roma kids. We are now currently with Kırkayak Kültür, who are based in Gaziantep, and they are working on Roma DOM kids, their participation in schools. We know that due to their cultural differences and needs, the school system may push them towards special education, so that families can receive, support, financial support, and their kids, they don't actually put them into the system for absenteeism, for example. This is a huge discrimination issue, and it deepens the inequalities. Recently, the impact of COVID, there was another, Tarlabaşı Toplum Merkezi had research directly, they directly talk with children, and I can share it with Güneş Hoca, the links of those reports. You can see how deepen how deep is the discrimination for Roma kids. You can see tohumotism, how deep is for special education kids. You can see UNHCR, UNICEF, Yuva Derneği for refugee kids. There is this problem of mother tongue. Turkey is a multicultural country, but there are regions who actually cannot talk in Turkish, and their access to school, it's a trauma for some kids, I would say. So gender is another discriminative area. There was Canan Aretemur and Sezen Bayhan's very important report on books, and you can see the problematic areas for gender, for secularism, for those areas, I would say. So these are just the basic first-hand data that I can share, information that I can share. But and the COVID increased a lot, actually.
Thank you.
The digital divide, that's what we call, increased.
Actually, I have a question about your opinions regarding opening the schools, because from what I can follow, it's a controversial issue. Does benefits outweigh the risks? I was reading in a US-based opinion saying that we should consider schools as essential services. You know, how essential services continue to provide services even during COVID. What is your own, or as an organization, what is your position on that? How prioritized it must be to open the schools right now?
Highly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not up to us to decide, to say, you know, they should be open or not. They should, obviously, but you know, there should be other circumstances to be put place. It should be prioritized. Schools are not the only places where you learn. It's also child protection sites. And currently, one big issue that I didn't mention today was, I can't remember its English word, sorry for now, ihmal istismar.
Sexual harassment and
violence, all terms of violence among children. We cannot monitor that. Digital violence, home, or you know, we cannot follow that. Teachers we're monitoring kids, not only for violence but also for, you know, food as well, for other well-being areas as well. It wasn't a perfect system, obviously. There were many shortcomings, many gaps there, but still there was a system and we could monitor kids. But currently we cannot. So that's a quite important area for schools. So schools everywhere should be prioritized. But it is not.
Yes. I actually have, okay, Burcu has a question. Go ahead, Burcu, you're permitted to talk, so you can ask your question.
Thank you. I was just wondering, can you give a few tips on how we can contribute or engage for equality in education?
You as students, or you as NGO members, you as researchers, or
us as students?
Students and researchers, let me say. Well, there are so many areas that you can, you know, there's a huge gap in Turkey that we need to understand better. So you can choose those areas, maybe work on those, or you can really be part of an NGO and support personally if you want. But students, wow, you can be a part of a bigger, bigger organization, I would say. It's systemic. There are systemic problems. As researchers, you should find out those systemic problems, gaps, and you can actually implement intervention programs that could work, that could include kids who are out of school, or, you know, who are discriminated, or, you know, other issues. Any issue you can choose among the ones that I shared, and there's much more. It was a very difficult question, Burcu, but we can expect you to add again if you want to work on more.
Thank you.
Okay. I had a one more question as well. So going through your biography, you're very much involved with environmental issues. To what extent these, this environmental education, literacy, is there any room for this right now in Turkish curriculums? Are there any promising trends?
There is, hopefully. Luckily, I would say. I hope it will work. I'm a bird watcher, yes. I studied chemistry and I worked on environmental education. Then at 2007, I found out the best practices in education conference of ERG, and I knocked their door to become volunteer. But I really find myself working on critical thinking projects. I work with Sami Gülgöz there. Learned a lot from him. You're lucky to have him there. On teacher policies and on the education-based policies. Then I actually work again on climate change issues and came back 2017. Last autumn, Ministry of Education announced a protocol that was signed with an NGO called Yuvam Dünya Derneği. Currently, they are working, we don't have the data, much information, detailed information, but currently they are working on implementing and developing and implementing climate change education at all levels, starting from pre-primary, which is really good. But how COVID did affect those, I don't know. But during the COVID, they announced it, and they are the last issue of the Yada dergisi, Yada magazine, was focused on climate change education. In the strategy that was shared by the ministry in 2018, I guess, I lost track of time, I'm sorry, but 2018, because of COVID. And in the strategy for Turkey, that was a very important strategic plan. You may critically consider those, but still it was very different than before, the strategies before. And there was a huge mention on ecosystems, learning from nature, and which is.
Yeah, I was gonna ask this biomimicry, like.
Yes, learning from nature.
Okay.
That's a really an amazing interdisciplinary discipline that I enjoyed. We were instructing that with Professor Dr. Lale Duriz at Bilgi University for 5 years. She continues, but I stopped for my studies. Well, it was good because students were choosing any issue, like COVID, for example, like hygiene or any other issue, or packaging or plastic, etc. And then they were looking to ecosystems, organisms, anything on nature to find a solution, because the discipline says that all solutions are there. All solutions are there, and there are billions of designers who solve problems for over 3.8 billion years, life on Earth, the age of life on Earth.
Very interesting and inspiring. We have Turgut has a question. Turgut, do you want to ask your own question? I allowed you to talk.
Can you hear me right now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can hear you.
Actually, I was wondering what are your thoughts about the schools teaching in Kurdish language? Because will those students receiving teaching from there, will they have positive influence on those regions?
There is no school who are in Turkey K-12 system. There is no school who teaches in Kurdish. All schools are in Turkish. So are you talking about private schools?
Maybe they have lectures in Kurdish or Kurdish classes. Is that the case?
I was talking about schools in like 2014. The schools opened in Diyarbakır and those Kurdish population based cities where they actually the media was mostly showing them like Kurdish language schools. So I thought maybe they were completely in Kurdish, but apparently they were not. So were those classes like elective Kurdish lessons?
There were, but I should check current status. I don't know the current status. I should ask to my colleagues who are working particularly on multiculturalism. But as I mentioned, all school system is Turkish in Turkey.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Batuhan also has a question regarding the curriculum, current curriculum. Batuhan, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I can. What can be additional measures about the modern world problems such as renewables, environmental education, gender inequality, global warming, etc.?
So many. There is no blueprint, but we are focusing on several of them, which I will share two of them with you. One is children participation. In Turkey, students doesn't account as stakeholders, but they are the biggest stakeholders and they should be part of any decision making. And regardless of their age, because there are ways to include pre-primary school into participation processes. So one is this, to really understand the rights, participation rights of students. And the second is, I believe, the aim in the constitution, in the policy papers, policy documents, the aim of education should change. It's mostly looked towards economic view, but it should change.
Like finding a job, right?
Finding a job, yes. Finding a job, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and I think we are almost done with our time slot as well.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for making time for us. Can you share some kind of contact information, either yours or like if our students have further questions or if they look for internship opportunities, if there's an email you can share, or you can share it later with me and I can share it with the students as well.
Yes, Education Reform Initiative's website, all our contact information is there. You can write and you will receive answer quite soon. Unfortunately, during our Sabancı University system, we don't have any more internships. We are so sad about this, but there can be other ways of discussing or working together. If you have any questions, please feel free to.
Okay, so they can find your email address from our website and.
Yeah, I can even write panelists.
That's okay. I'm sure they can figure it out.
Let me write my.
Okay, guys, thank you for participating. So if there are no more questions, everyone have a good evening. Okay, so Burcu also shared her email address. You can see it in the chat box.
Thank you for joining in me.
So much.
Have time for me and inviting. Thank you. So.
Okay, good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.